Our next speaker is Adelle Nazarian, who is the program director at the Henry Jackson Society's office in Los Angeles. She previously worked with the Fox News Channel in New York City as a reporter, producer, and an editor. While she was there, she covered, discussed, and even broke several original and international news stories. One of them was the fraudulent Iranian elections and the highly disputed victory of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, in which she conducted personal interviews with Iranian youth as the government was disconnecting its nationals from all forms of communication with the outside world. She sits on the board of the Mahmoud Foundation and is an active member of 30 Years After. She was born in Livingston, New Jersey, and Adelle is a first-generation Iranian-American whose parents fled their homeland at the onset of the revolution. She graduated with honors from Drew University with not just one, but 2 bachelor's degrees in Chinese, that's awesome, and the other in political science. Please join me in welcoming Adelle Nazarian.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, Lamore, for that wonderful introduction, and Jared for that. Gerard. Sorry, I'm going to get it. For that fantastic presentation as well. So I'd like to give you a little bit of background information about the Henry Jackson Society. It's a British, London-based foreign policy think tank, which is set on fostering a strong European, British, and American commitment towards the promotion of certain moral concepts in foreign policy, namely liberty, democracy, and human rights. We're also for a strong alliance between the Western world in combating really the treacherous of the day, the most prescient of which today seems to be radical Islam. Many of you may be thinking, well, why Scoop Jackson? Why name a European think tank after an American political figure? Well, as many of you may know, Henry Jackson was a Washington state senator, and he was a great, great man. He personified a lot of what we feel is missing today in American politics and politics throughout the world. He really reached across the aisle to deal with both Democrats and Republicans to really get the work that had to be done. And his philosophy was actually carried out by the likes of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, 2 great people throughout our history. In the mid-2000s, when we were established, it was a time when the Iraq War really dominated all public discourse. You'd see in the streets of Europe, in London in particular, people rioting against the Iraq War. We were able to detect a bit more sinister agenda beneath all of this. It wasn't just anti-war protesters who were taking to the streets, but it was far leftists, people like Trotskyites, social workers, and hand in hand with them were people from the radical Islamic regime, people who were radical Muslims. So as we actually, we saw this sort of contagion occurring where people were holding up signs saying, you know, end the war in Iraq. Then you turn that exact sign around and you'd see written on it, Free Palestine. So we were thinking, well, that's a bit odd. What does Palestine have to do with the Iraq war? So we couldn't really see the connectivity and were a bit skeptical about what the connection was. As we walked further down the lines, you'd see more signs. You know, America revealed. America is the most evil country, most dangerous country in the world. I'm sure many of you recall there were a lot of polls done around that time throughout Europe. It showed that America was more dangerous than Iran. America was more dangerous than Russia, than North Korea. George Bush was evil. Britain was evil for being part of all of it, and of course, Israel was evil too, if for no other reason than the agenda that these people had behind what they were actually trying to achieve. So, you know, we finally in 2006 with the Hezbollah conference, I guess that's what you could call the final nail in the coffin for us as far as we were concerned. It was the ultimate disgrace. We had people of the middle class walking around. Mind you, these are educated people who have been through university and who have jobs, walking around holding up signs saying, we are all Hezbollah now. I mean, it was just shocking. This is supposedly in a country country that's similar to the United States in terms of liberal freedoms, respect for minorities, all of these things. And here they are testing their, I guess, affinity for a terrorist group, saying that they wanted to kill Jews and destroy Israel. So that's basically when we decided that we weren't going to sit around and wait for the disaster to happen. And we started the Henry Jackson Society, which is based out of London. So what is this phenomenon of delegitimization of Israel that we see in Europe, and actually that's arriving here in America? Well, it's a constant concern about what's happening in Israel in terms of opinions and political pressure in Europe. And it's not just a problem in Europe, it's actually a problem here as well. In California, in the Bay Area, we have a lot of problems in terms of political activity on campuses about how Israel is perceived. In Toronto, Canada, you have issues as well. My colleague, actually, Dr. Alan Mendoza, was just in South Africa, in Cape Town, and he witnessed a very difficult situation with the way that the government's attitude is towards Israel. So people don't really realize this, but the phenomenon that's going on needs to be countered in each and every single one of these places. And it's not just going to be done with people like myself and with Gerard, who are doing amazing work to really help to spread the word and to get what we need to done. But it's with people like yourselves, people in the audience, who really have to be part of this solution and this effort. So let me explain delegitimization. What exactly do we mean by this phrase, delegitimization? Well, the analysis can be sort of given by looking at two types of people who deny two things. The first thing is denying that Israel is a normal state, much like any other country throughout the world. And with that, a much higher and more difficult criteria is applied to it by which it governs itself. And it's really held to a much higher standard because of that than any other country throughout the world. So the second thing is denying the specifically Jewish character of the state of Israel. Often you'll notice that Israel grants equality to all of its citizens, regardless of race, gender, and creed. As you said, it's the only democracy in the Middle East. And delegitimizers often seek to oppose the uniquely Jewish character of that state, frequently arguing for a one-state solution. They do not look at the established paradigm for peace, which is a two-state solution, in which we have Palestinians and Israelis living in two states with two peoples, but instead they are actually for a one-state solution, sort of a binational state with people living allegedly happily ever after. We had David Pollack of the Washington Institute actually speak around Europe about a few months ago about a poll that was done by the Council on Foreign Relations on Palestinian attitudes towards Israel, and it found that the majority of Palestinians in these polls did not want to live in Palestine. In fact, they preferred to live in Israel. Many of the Arabs prefer this. And the reason for it being, obviously there were more preferable economic prospects there and higher standards of living. So the point here is, if you don't fit the case, then people can't really understand it. You have the BBC, which paints lies. You have The Guardian, which is essentially feeding, all of these lies and rubbish. Some questionable, journalists right here in America, the LA Times, the New York Times, I don't need to name names. I'm sure you can all pick up a paper and see who I'm referring to. So it brings me to actually tell you that all these forms of information are really detrimental to Israel. And I want to share a story with you now. Sheikh Abdul Kalazi actually is a professor at the Research Institute of Anthropological Studies in Rome. And he was a guest lecturer at Yale University in the spring of 2003. He spoke of a visit he had made to Israel in 2000, in which he spoke with a representative of the Waqf. And the Waqf is the Palestinian religious committee, which is in charge of overseeing the religious sites at the Holy Temple Mount. He said this: "They took us to visit Al-Aqsa, the Silver Dome Mosque at the south end of the Temple Mount. Right outside the dome of the rock is a small chapel on the eastern side. 'What is this place?' I asked. 'It is the place where Solomon stood to dedicate the temple,' was the reply. 'Then why do you deny this?' I asked. With a smile, I was told, 'For political reasons.'" Well, understanding these political reasons for Arab lies that are so cheerfully acknowledged requires a scope and a strategy of for the decades-long propaganda war against Israel. The goal of this war is, of course, to delegitimize Israel and to rebrand it as a rogue racist state, and to make and convince other countries that, in fact, supporting Israel is supporting evil. So the key elements of the strategy are on public display for everyone to see. You have the unremitting attacks at the UN on Israel's occupancy and settlement of Palestine. You have the BDS campaigns, which are the boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaigns, which are directed at the trustees of US and European universities. And you have Nakba demonstrations on American campuses, here on American soil, which mourn the creation of Israel as essentially being a genocide, an act of genocide against the indigenous Palestinian people. So basically, the Israel denial, which is at the heart of these methodical falsifications in that region, are really an effort to commit a sort of conceptual genocide on the Jewish people. And this really works hand in hand with the literal genocide that so many Middle Eastern and Arab leaders have called for. So, language being used is essential here. As you know, the delegitimizers of Israel use a particular kind of language. They look to demonize Israel. And the language puts Israel on the pale of civilizations. What do I mean by this? I'll give you an example. You can say a country is bad, but to say that a country is, that's one thing, but to say a country is a Nazi state, that they have ghettoized their population in regards to the Gaza Strip, and that Gaza is actually a concentration camp, well, that's creating a very different sense of what that country is. Now, not only is it a bad country, but suddenly it's the most evil country in the world, according to these people. And, with today's media and technology, it's so easy to get this information out across the web, and people who don't really know, the information, the truth of what's happening, just eat it up and they think it's the truth. So, what's going on is the language differentiates those who criticize Israel from those who actually seem to delegitimize it. You can criticize Israel, that's fine. You can criticize like any other country in the world. But those people who try to actually delegitimize Israel and turn Israel into a pariah state, they're the ones that we're more concerned about. And they've been gaining a lot of traction and a lot of credibility in European circles as of late, especially here in America, as you may come to see. So you're probably wondering, who are these people and how is this happening? It can be broken down into basically two groups of dissidents that are working together, and it's called the Red-Green Coalition. On the red side, you have the leftist people who are Trotskyites, socialists, communists, people who seek to oppose Israel on ideological grounds. Then you have on the green side the Islamists and the radical Muslims, and they seek to oppose Israel on religious grounds. The Reds believe that Israel shouldn't be in the Middle East. They actually have, you may say they even have sort of an anti-colonial mentality, as you were referring to before. It's not to say Israel is a colonial state, it's actually not. It's quite the opposite. But they look at it of the point of view from the point of view of a racial issue, like a white versus non-white issue. And since the end of apartheid, as was mentioned earlier, 20 years ago, it's a long time, in South Africa, they've sort of been seeking a new target, and Israel fits the bill. Israel's the perfect target. Why? Because it's still a strong national country, whereas in much of Europe, a sense of nationalism has been destroyed. There's no sense of national identity, and many people actually hate the fact that Israel has a strong national identity, and they hate that it's a Zionist state on this basis. Europeans have essentially demoted themselves when it comes to this. The same people who once went around the world preaching their religion to others have now become so weakened and corrupted that they view Islamic immigrants to be superior to themselves, and their culture to be superior to their own. So they hate what Britain and America stand for, these delegitimizers of Israel. You have on university campuses who invite very, cunning and extreme speakers who seek to radicalize the students. Universities, which are the bastions of free thought, have actually turned into the bastions of intolerant thought. And I'll give you an example of what we've done at ACSZ to actually combat this. Howard Davies, who was the Vice Chancellor of the London School of Economics, a very prestigious school throughout the world, he was actually accepting money, tainted money from Libya, from the Gaddafi regime, and because of pressure from us, we were able to force him to resign. Yeah, so it's a pretty good accomplishment, hopefully many more of which we hope to achieve. On the green side, obviously, you have the religious perspective, which is the Muslim-Jewish aspect. and some Christian aspect as well. Don't forget, there's still a very good and substantial number of Christians who are in the Holy Land. The odd thing here, though, is that you have, these two groups of people who are so opposite in their views coming together, and that's what kind of baffled us. You have people on the far left who believe in, the values of having respect for minorities, gender equality, human rights and feminism. The Islamists, on the other hand, in Islam there is no such thing as homosexuality. Women do not hold the same rights as men. They have less rights than men do. And the Quran actually preaches that it's okay to kill non-Muslims so long as you're doing it in the name of Allah, the Almighty, and you'll be granted a place in heaven because it's in His name. So all these things are very, 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 very scary to people who don't really know much about what's going on. So essentially, these two groups who ordinarily wouldn't come together have come together, and on one issue. It's to take down Israel. So why is the green element so strong in this whole equation? There's been the mass immigration to Europe has really been a problem, led to a population problem. And it's not a Muslim problem per se, it's more a problem of integration. What's wrong with Europe? These people are encouraged to actually not integrate into society, and instead to keep within themselves and to keep to their own sort of ghettoized enclaves, if I may say. In the East End of London, for example, which used to be majoritarily Jewish, you have it now, it's called Banglatown because of the influx of Bengali speakers in that region. So the language that's being used is obviously a key and essential component in what's going on. But why has this language been so effective? Well, the attacking of Israel is not a recent phenomenon. It's been going around for a long time now, and in fact, Israel's delegitimizers have been well organized for a long period of time, and many people don't seem to realize this. In 1983, the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign was established in Britain, and they essentially seek to delegitimize Israel in the British and political civil society circles. So they have a 30-year head start on people who are just now trying to oppose that. South Africa, again, used to be a main target. And now these people are trying to use South Africa and the apartheid state model to focus on Israel. And Israel, again, is not an apartheid state. But these people are motivated by lies, not truths. And you can tell them they're wrong, but they won't care because they're motivated by hatred. And it encourages them to say things that are untrue. It perpetuates lies, and their own myths become the truth in place of the actual reality. So I actually was reading a book a few months back by Wafa Sultan. I'm sure you've heard of her. She's a Muslim woman. She's been in the media quite a bit recently, and she wrote the book A God Who Hates. I want to read an excerpt from it. I have never in my life seen Muslims talk without disagreement. Their tendency to argumentativeness makes them defensive, and their custom deems attack to be the best method of defense, since it gives them the chance to shout and shriek. Shouting has become their hallmark. Without it, they have no sense of even being alive. They believe that the louder they shriek, the more they prove they are right. He who shouts the loudest and screeches the longest is, they believe, the strongest. She goes on to write, when a person adopts a particular style or behavior, he observes the degree to which other people accept it. If they encourage him, or at least make no objection, he will continue. The way the world has retreated and continues to retreat in the face of Muslim screams and shouts has played a major role in encouraging them to continue to behave the way they do. When others remain silent, or worse, retreat, Muslims get the impression that they are right. And of course, this is the extreme sector of Islam. It's not all the Muslims, this is the extremists. So, the reemergence of anti-Semitism and this delegitimization of Israel have been going on over the last 10 years, as I said. In post-Holocaust Europe, you sort of had it go underneath the radar for a bit, and it was completely unacceptable. For obvious reasons, there was sufficient guilt that came with that part of history. But over the last 10 years, it's actually reemerged, and in a prism of anti-Israel hatred, which has been made acceptable once again. You have cartoons and caricatures. Ariel Sharon eating babies, Jews dressing up as Nazis. This reinforces the hatred once again. So I'd like to leave you with this. As you know, Palestine recently went to the UN, and they made a bid for statehood. Well, British Parliament, astonishingly, contrary to the US, has not made a move to veto this. And not because it's instinctively anti-Israel. I think about 15% of the people there are anti-Israel and 15% pro-Israel. It's the other 70% that really don't have an understanding of the issue, and that's where we come in. It's very difficult to start arguing a solution, because if you do, you won't get a solution. So what we've done is actually create papers and take them to members of parliament and heads of state and basically argue to them why Palestinians should not have their own state, why it's not a good idea. We've had American speakers from all over the world come, and we've actually had questions in the House of Commons because of it, and it's really made an impact with the work that we're doing. So I wanted to thank all of you for coming tonight and for listening to us speak, and I hope that it sort of inspired you to really take part in the amazing work that both Jared and myself are doing. Thank you so much, and now questions and answers.